panel here today to talk on the Virtual Print Future Summit. And we're going to be looking at the next generation in the inkjet community. And I've got a fantastic panel which are all going to introduce themselves shortly, but we're going to be speaking with the universities, people at the universities, and then also HR as well, HR consultant, to look at, once we get this great talent, this next generation, how can we actually keep them? How can you as a company keep these great employees as well? So we've got Patrick, Christina and Pip. So we'll start with Patrick, if that's okay. If you can just perhaps give a summary on yourself and your relationship with inkjet, that would be fantastic.
Of course, yeah. Hi, Dorinda, and thanks for including me in this. So my name's Dr. Patrick Smith. I've been working as an academic researcher in inkjet for about 20 years, not over 20 years, under 20 years, but about that mark. Been based at the University of Sheffield now for over 10 years. I run my lab there, which is the Applied Inkjet Printing Lab. So the question that we used to ask is, what could we use inkjet printing for? The idea of using inkjet as a manufacturing tool. We're now moving more back into fundamental inkjet research. The cynics amongst you would say that's because we've discovered it doesn't work, but it's actually because there's some things that we were just sort of saying, yes, it's fine, and now we're looking more into it, and so yeah, we need this to work forward on. Okay, so my role in this particular aspect is I'm training graduates and postgraduates and getting them ready to enter the job market, preferably with a good career in inkjet.
Fantastic. Thanks, Patrick. And then we'll move on to Christina at the University of Cambridge. If you can just give a quick intro to yourself as well, please.
Yeah, sure. Dorinda, thank you very much for having me here. It's really a pleasure. So I'm an engineer as background. Then I went straight to a doctorate, a PhD on fluid mechanics. And then that was back in mainland Spain. And then I came to Cambridge. I joined then the field of inkjet. So I started working on projects related to inkjet. So we did at the time quite a lot of fundamental research, but always trying to apply that to real applications of inkjet. At the moment, I also work with scale-up processes and thinking how fundamental research or fundamental phenomena have somehow quite a lot of, let's say, it links quite a lot with the difficulties of scaling up a process when using inkjet. And yeah, my role in the panel, I hope, will be like giving a view about what I would like to see in an industry if I was to move to industry from academia, and how I think academia and industry can connect a bit better. So yeah, I hope that will be helpful.
Definitely will be, Christina. Thank you. And then last but not least, Pip, we've worked together for quite a while over the years. So just if you can say a bit about your relationship with inkjet and your knowledge base, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so thanks for having me as well. So I'm Pip Fulsham. I'm now a freelance HR consultant. But through my 20-year HR career, I've worked in all sorts of different industries, from NHS to education, through to utilities, and then most recently, before I went freelance, I actually held two kind of senior HR roles in the inkjet industry, one at Domino Printing and the other at Inca Digital, both based in Cambridge. So some experience of recruiting for the HR industry, retaining for the HR industry, and all things people in that industry. And I guess my role today is talking particularly about employee engagement and retention and kind of strategies that might help people to look at that in quite a practical way, particularly in light of everything else that's going on at the moment as well.
Fantastic. And I think it is that, to me, it's so important to have both sides. So we're looking at the universities, and then myself meeting the demand for industry, finding the top talent in the industry currently, and then looking at how you can keep this top talent, be it the next generation from the universities, people who are established in the industry, and then keeping this talent as well. So we'll go back to Patrick now. We've just got some questions for each of you. At the end of this discussion, I believe people can put any questions as well, so please do add them afterwards as well. But we'll start off with the universities. There's been a lot in the press, hasn't there, about people getting their grades and everything else that's been happening. So how has the pandemic affected universities and the intake this year, Patrick, would you say, for your students?
Well, the short answer is that actually the pandemic is actually, certainly from Sheffield point of view, appears to have increased numbers. Although certainly at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of worry that there would be a decrease in student numbers, and I felt, the sector itself had felt that. Now, obviously, we still maybe a few weeks away from seeing who actually arrives as opposed to who says they're going to arrive. But fingers crossed, we're a lot more in control of the situation, and, around the world we see that as well. So I think actually the pandemic has probably helped universities in terms of recruiting students, and I think the logic for that is a school leaver at the moment may very well choose a university degree at the moment, simply because they've got a guaranteed 3 years and know what they're going to do. A lot of the comments and critique about how the pandemic is going to affect global economies, the global economy as well as national economies, has been it's going to take probably 3 years to get back to being healthy. So there's a lot of common sense where somebody quite sensibly sort of said, okay, I know what I'm going to do for 3 years, and I'm going to enter a growing job market with the skills, with more skills. So there's a lot of logic to that. So yeah, that's the long answer. The short answer was actually it wasn't as scary as we thought it was. We're almost there, and it's looking promising, which is nice to say.
It's great to hear anyway, and I wish all the students out there all the success, and even if they don't have freshers weeks and things that we all maybe had something to enjoy, that they do still have time to meet friends and settle in and do well in their first term.
Yeah.
We as an industry really need to be building on the next generation, and I think it has been said that the print industry can be quite a mature market, it can be male dominated, so we're looking at bringing people into the industry as well. So how would you say that you could be looking at encouraging students and building awareness on inkjet, because not everyone's aware of the wonderful opportunities out there. How do you feel you could help students with this, Patrick?
Well, we try, certainly at Sheffield and, in my department, we highlight inkjet as being one of the additive manufacturing techniques we cover in our dedicated additive manufacturing module. And those particular lectures are well received. Last year we had a new module for our overseas students, our postgraduate taught students, and that was a mini project, and a number of those projects had inkjet as a basis for project ideas. So there's one on textile printing and digital printing with regard to textile printing. I also introduced first year students in the manufacturing technology to inkjet as well, because it's my research area. So first it's an easy lecture for me to prepare because all the slides are there anyway. But from a student's point of view, the lecturer for once knows what he's talking about, or at least gives a strong impression of such. So it's really getting across the fact that, and you'll probably see this, Pip and yourself, Dorinda, that inkjet has two core areas really that it wants to recruit from. One is mechanical engineers, and the second is chemists. Mm-hmm. So the chemists interact with the inks or contribute to the ink side of things. Mechanical engineers, to some degree, fluid mechanics, printer design. And I think for me, it's important to let mechanical engineers know, because I'm based in the mechanical engineering department, that when we say inkjet, they don't think ink chemistry is not for me. They actually think, it's the printer and it's an actual machine, and it's a lot of different mechanical components talking to one another and performing functions, and that's where we need to think about.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely, because there's two sides to it, isn't there?
Yeah, and there's one final point as well. A big part of mechanical engineering is manufacturing. And so the print industry, inkjet printing itself is a core manufacturing technique, and a lot of my research, and I'm sure Christina's as well, has been looking at how do we expand its manufacturing capabilities.
Brilliant. And I know we've been quite excited to be working on the Academy for Inkjet as well, and looking at helping companies get a better interview process and get to know about these students. So could you tell us a little bit about that as well for people that might have not heard about this?
Yeah, well, some of that was, we had actually between ourselves, Dorinda, you and I had actually had a touch of prophecy about us because we predicted what Boris would say back in April, which was, universities producing useless degrees. Well, it's worth mentioning that, my university and Christina's university tend not to produce useless degrees. I don't think any university really does that. I waffle and go off being a typical academic, but the point here was being that the idea behind the Academy for Inkjet was to sort of say, let's develop and encourage a number of graduates to first consider inkjet printing as a career, and second, to talk to inkjet printing companies and say, what skills do you want us to focus on? We've got, for example, in the final year projects, which is where we're focusing the scheme, we've got a whole year to be able to sort of say, okay, for some skills that you want us to bring forward, and maybe just specialised education. As universities, we tend to give people, yes, a specialised education, but we also consider the fact that they are going into, we want them to have as a wider range of opportunities as possible in terms of future careers. So we don't sort of say, okay, you are going to be a mechanical engineer. We're going to say, you're a very skilled, gifted person with a mechanical engineering degree. Oh, that's my context. But for the Academy of Inkjet, it's the ability to sort of say, okay, what particular skills, to say to companies, what skills, what projects would you like our students to focus on? They've got then some experience of a stronger candidate. Has that answered your question?
Absolutely.
All right, all good.
And then finally, how do you feel we could increase the link between the universities and industry?
Well, I think first we'll see how our trial scheme goes. You and I are very pleased that we've got a good company on board, and we're very happy that they're on board. And I think the right thing to do is to see how that works. Second thing, perhaps, is what we're doing right now is just highlighting that we have this mechanism. We're developing it. You and I, Dorinda, have sort of identified 2 more partners that we want to bring on board. First from academia, and then there's also additional inkjet companies we want to bring on board. And the idea is just simply to sort of say, as universities, what can we do to support not only a British industry, but a very exciting industry, one which actually has benefited from the pandemic and shows continuing strength.
Definitely. And I think one of the positive things for me personally through the pandemic has been able to launch this, because it's been something we've wanted to do for ages, but we're all so busy, aren't we, that it gives you time to step back for a moment and think, what do I want to do? What's really important? And one thing is really to look at getting students into the industry, which leads me on to Christina. So with regards to yourself, could you, we're looking at for yourself, how do you feel we can increase this relationship from your side, being at a university?
So at the moment, at least what helped me quite a lot, because as I mentioned, I hadn't worked in Inkjet, and I was not even aware of what Inkjet was. Again, as Patrick was mentioning, all those kind of mechanical components and also a bit of chemistry. So it's just like a very multidisciplinary world, and I didn't know it until starting my postdoctoral research. So again, I think there's a bit of a lack of knowledge about the field when you study. Like, again, in my case, it was an engineering, and I even did a PhD in fluid mechanics in the smallest scale somehow. So it means, like, I should have encountered somehow the field, but it wasn't that easy. So, but after I started working in Inkjet as a researcher, then I realized that I'm lucky enough as to be working in the Institute for Manufacturing in Cambridge, and that means that we are very aware about how important it is to connect with industry and to work with them as close as possible. And again, we have a team of people in the building who really work towards building those connections. I think it's a bit more difficult maybe in other sections in the Department of Engineering itself. But even though sometimes it's very difficult also to have projects in common with industry, you may come to a state in which you know some of them and you have a couple of meetings from time to time. But again, sometimes it's a bit difficult also because of NDA agreements, and we get all that. But again, there's certain effort that needs to be put there on the table just to start again, like building those sort of projects in common and maybe have more of a longer vision for collaboration. So there are quite a lot of things these days that are helping with that, which is like, I don't know, industrial fellowships in which a researcher from the university can move to a company for 6 months up to a year. So a relatively fair amount of time. And again, starting building up something, knowing how industry works, because again, it's completely different to our way of doing things in academia most of the times. And I think there's also certain uncertainty from someone that hasn't worked in an industry before, in a company before. So that this sort of fellowships or other grants that allow to do that, I think that help quite a lot in a researcher from academia or an academic to know how a company works and again, what are the goals of that company, what sort of innovation they want to achieve. So I think that's very helpful. And the other way around, like sometimes again, these fellowships and these grants can bring people from industry into the labs, into the university, and they also see kind of the sort of capabilities that we have, the sort of mindset that is built around the university somehow. And again, I think that connection is key really to help helping in that sort of transition from academia to industry, or even the other way around. I guess that could work also. So I think that's one of the key points these days, and I think companies should be looking into those sort of schemes and trying to connect with academia in a more direct way, at least at the postdoctoral level or doctoral level, I think.
Yeah, we just want to strengthen those connections as much as we can, and that's good thoughts really there, with, like you say, with fellowships and grants and things like that. I mean, what events do you think that companies could look at to increase the network? Obviously, it's difficult to have events at the moment, but it is good that you're in Cambridge, so hopefully we can look at perhaps smaller niche events where we don't have to have high volumes of people, or virtual events that people can do in the evenings or even at weekends or what have you. But I mean, have you been to many events in the area, or do you feel that would help with the connections?
Definitely. Actually, I quite like to attend, well, these days virtually, the career events, because I think a lot of postdoctoral researchers or, again, PhD students, we know that staying in academia, even if we like it, or sometimes, again, we don't really know what we want. So staying in academia for a long term is difficult. So there are not so many lecturer positions and, up to a professorship, of course. But so I think a lot of us just want to know more about how we can explore what's out there. And I think career events, at least here in Cambridge, I know that a lot of postdocs quite like them. We attend to those events and we get to know quite a lot of companies that way. I know people that have then applied for positions after having met certain companies in these career events. And again, I think I don't know how typical it is outside Cambridge. I know in Cambridge there are a couple of networks that kind of provide somehow this service and or at least support these events. I don't know again how often that happens outside here, but I think it's definitely very helpful. Even recruiters also participate sometimes in these events, and they also describe a bit what some of the fields are out there maybe looking for in a sort of more academic profile, like, just like realize what sort of skills you have. You may not realize being in academia for so long, but you definitely have built quite a lot of skills that are needed in industry, and you may not realize. So they also help in that. Also, again, I'm not sure how. I think all universities these days, they have a career service that is quite focused from the undergraduate level up to the postdoctoral level, and they are very helpful, like with also building or writing your CV. I think it's not the same an academic CV than a CV which is more again, suited for industry. They help a lot with that. So I think, again, it's also something that companies may be reaching at, like career services, and kind of also letting them know that they are out there and they may be needing, like, people with certain skills. So that helps, I think, career services too.
And I think, like you say, sometimes people don't always know what they want, but if they see a good company and think that's a really good technology, that's really innovative, I want to be part of that, I can use my skills. And they might have not necessarily thought about leaving academia, but actually when they see it is something different and the impact they can make on industry, they could decide to make that leap over. And similarly for industry, sometimes people set out with, we know we're looking for this type of profile. It could be sort of an engineer or chemist or what have you, but it could be someone who's been working at a university and they might have not considered that as an option. And there is a niche talent pool and they might have not been able to find people. They've had someone who's gone from Domino to Inca to whoever, and they want something different. They want something fresh. They want some new ideas. And actually getting someone like yourself who's going to come in with such wonderful experience in inkjet, but from a slightly different angle, could really work. I mean, what would you be looking for with regards to career opportunities? If you were going to a company, what do you think you'd be looking for yourself? And what, I know you can't speak for other people, but perhaps what other people might be from academia?
Okay, so again, this can get a bit personal. I hope not. I hope I'm covering at least most of the postdocs I know. They think in a similar way. So definitely, I guess we like companies that are kind of continuously innovating, and I think InkJet is one of those fields in which there's continuous innovation, really. So I think that's covered somehow there, because again we like knowing that we're going to be engaged in research somehow and in new products and in new ideas. So I think that's one thing. Then something that I think we value quite a lot, and that's because we find it in especially again in academia, is multidisciplinary and multinational teams. We're very used to have input from colleagues around us that are, again, they come with maybe a different mindset from a different country or some other places in which they've been working, like again generally in a multinational somehow scale. And I think that helps quite a lot. I quite enjoy it. Because again, sometimes we've been also jumping from one country to another, and we kind of like to keep like that. I mean, I like languages, I like new cultures. So again, if you can have that in a company or in a team, I think that's really helpful. And then what else? There are things like, in my particular case, I like traveling. So some people may have families and maybe they want something a bit more settled, and I guess that's quite personal. I like, like a company that has maybe sites internationally. I quite like that opportunity maybe to say, you can go and visit this other team for a couple of months, and then, I share experiences on, a similar project, or the same, if you're working in the same product. So I think that's also nice to have that opportunity. And that also links maybe with professional development, because I think, again, that's something that, at least in my case, I do quite a lot. Like I like, attending events on entrepreneurship or like business management. So because I think companies sometimes, they think like postdocs lack, or researchers in general from academia, they lack business management skills or management skills in general. I think that's not true, because again, we work with students generally in the laboratory. We need to manage a lot of projects sometimes, budgeting. So again, it depends on every case, of course, and every research group has a bit of a different way of doing those things. But I think at the postdoctoral level at least, we require quite a lot of management skills, and I think it's not that bad. But in any case, I quite like to engage with some of the things outside research in that proper sense. So I think having that in a company, because for instance here in the university, I have that option. Having that in a company, I think that really helps quite a lot. In because again, you can learn maybe using from using a new software to new equipment, to again, just learning maybe something completely different and just like, do a bit of marketing at some point, or, like, I think because then you have so many teams, like, again, marketing, sales, you can always, or face-to-face with the customer services. I think that all helps if there's some sort of connection with all the teams and some other professional development opportunities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know, because I do find it saddens me sometimes when someone's doing a really good job. I've only had it recently, the other day, that I placed someone with a company, and the reason that they were looking to leave their current employer was because they wouldn't change their role, because they were doing so well in their current role. They had such great attention to detail in that current role that they wouldn't move them, so they've left. But surely they would have been better to keep those skills in the business and let them move slightly, or even just have a bit more variety, because they didn't want to be stuck and pigeonholed in this one area. And I think for yourself, you're very unique in that you've got a lot of academia, but you've got a lot of commercial skills as well, and you've got languages, you've got knowledge in inkjet, so I feel there's a lot that you could actually offer to a company. But I suppose in return you would like a lot of people to perhaps experience different areas in the business, and it's a great way to learn and also to have the opportunity to potentially travel. And it's better to move someone internally and let them go to Spain or Australia or America, wherever possible, with visas and work allowances, rather than lose those skills. So thank you, Christina, that's fantastic. So I'm just going to take a short break now, and then if we can all come back, and then we'll go on to Pip, if that's okay. So we're moving now on to Pip to look at HR, and once we've got this wonderful talent, how we can actually get involved in keeping them, engaging them and retaining them. So perhaps you could start about how you found moving into inkjet when you had never come across it before, and how you found the industry and how you found working in it.
Yeah, so prior to joining inkjet, I was working in the utility sector, so working for Anglian Water, so very different. And a recruiter, much like yourself, Dorinda, contacted me and said they had an opportunity for an HR role. And I wanted to get some experience in a more sort of technology-based company, more kind of private sector for my CV, but also just to learn about different areas. And I went along to Domino. That was my first role that I took. And it was interesting. They've been around since 1978, and I was born in 79. So they've been around pretty much as long as I've been alive. And they are... What was funny was when I mentioned the name of the company to people in my network, or, friends, family, friends, things like that, there was lots of positive feedback. But I'd actually never heard of them. And I wasn't that aware of the inkjet industry being such a Cambridge-centric industry until I got into the industry. And then obviously, So whilst I was at Domino, it's interesting what Christina said. For me, one of the things that I wanted to do was to raise profile a lot more. So I was kind of put in charge of social media, because I like social media, and did a lot around trying to use social media to attract new candidates of all ages, but particularly in hot skill areas, but graduates and younger people, because you're right, it's an aging population in that industry. But also we did careers fairs. So interesting, when Christina was talking about those, we actually went out and did careers fairs, and we took one of the printers along and got one of the technical guys and asked to operate it. One of the technical guys took one of the laser printers along, and we were printing things on laser cards for people. And it was just very interactive. And for me, that was what attracted people to our stand, was that we had something very interactive and practical to show, to get people excited about the industry. And I suppose that harked back to my interview. When the head of HR showed me around and showed me all the different printers, he showed me this printer for printing on eggs, the best before date on eggs. And I had never really thought about how you get the best before date on an egg before that point. And I remember going home to my husband and saying, have you thought about how you get the best before date on an egg? Because you've got to be quite careful. And it just really sparked interest in me, because it is that kind of industry. Until you're working in it, you don't think about the impact it has and where that technology can be used. Then you get into the traceability coding and best before dates, and actually there's some really important stuff there that impacts on everybody in their everyday life, but you don't notice that you're being impacted by that industry. So for me, that kind of lit a fire of actually there's a story to tell here about how great this industry is, and like the panel have mentioned, how sort of multidisciplinary it is. I never really know how to describe those businesses when I introduce myself. Is it R&D innovation? Is it sort of scientific chemical, or is it manufacturing? Because actually it's all of them and more. It's sales, it's marketing. Actually, there's everything under those roofs, which is why it's such a great industry to be a part of, because you can progress through all sorts of different areas if you want. So the potential there for me is, and it was and is massive, for people to have a great long career in the inkjet industry in lots of different functions and lots of different ways.
No, that's fantastic. And I love the egg analogy. And you're so, you do mention Domino. My son's a massive Domino pizza person. And whenever I mention Domino, it's like a pizza, but it's raising that awareness, isn't it? It really is making people aware of it, and the multitude of roles that people can have across the industry as well. And I think it's really good that you were looking at that social media, because it's such a good way, especially with people being in with COVID and everything else, people doing videos, looking at social, being interactive, and just raising the awareness as much as we can, so that we can let all these brilliant people, all these brilliant students know about the industry. And not just students, people from other industries that can come over from medical or different types of industries. There's a lot of technology companies in Cambridge that might not still know. So it's very much raising awareness. So looking at employee engagement, not every company might understand what that terminology means. How would you describe it? How can we look at this practically with companies?
Okay, so rather than me try to describe it, I've actually gone and got a definition, because I think it sums it up more quickly, because I'll just ramble on forever about it otherwise. So the definition that I found, which is good, is that employee engagement is a workplace approach resulting in the right conditions for all members of an organisation to give their best each day, committed to the organisation's goals and values, motivated to contribute to organisational success with an enhanced sense of their own well-being. If anybody out there wants to read more on, because it's very closely linked to leadership, how a business is led results in how engaged the employees and staff feel, I would highly recommend Simon Sinek. If you're not already familiar with him, he's done a book called Leaders Eat Last. And one of the quotes from that is that engagement is not an HR issue, engagement is a leadership issue. And that's very much, now that I'm freelance, what I bang the drum on is actually, if you can get people engaged in what you're trying to achieve and in the industry and how great it is and what it can do, that is so closely linked to retention. If people are engaged, have challenges, I think you mentioned, Dorinda, somebody leaving because their job couldn't be changed. Well, okay, if you understand what motivates and engages somebody, you can establish if that's possible. And it's, you can't have ultimate flexibility, but in that instance, could you have maybe built in something to retain that employee for slightly longer and to keep those skills in the industry and maybe have led them down a different path potentially? So I'm a big fan of trying to get better engaged organisations and engaged employees, because I just think it has so many benefits. And if you have engaged staff, you're probably going to end up with less grievances, disciplinaries, performance issues, things like that as well, because people don't tend to complain if they're feeling engaged, if they're happy and fulfilled in their work. So it's all about creating this better workplace for everybody. But the massive contributor for me is around retention of skills and retention of people. And I think business owners out there will probably, at the moment, that could be a challenge, to keep people if, there are going to be potentially different jobs on the jobs market. I know there's redundancy, but actually redundancy often results in new roles being created, which might be exciting for people who are already employed. So retention is a massive link with employee engagement.
It is, definitely. It's almost like, the analogy is sort of your garden, and a lot of people have been spending a lot of time in the garden, haven't they, over lockdown and everything. But it's, if you water in your garden, you're looking after your employees, you're making sure that they're happy, you're going to have a great garden, aren't you? But otherwise you could potentially get some really nasty weeds. Yes. The whole garden not a great place to be, and you want it to be a great place, and you want it to look beautiful, and the people be very, very happy there as well. And we've talked about the different areas, because I think you've got the correct terminology for this, Pip, but with regards to looking at millennials, and then there's Gen Y and X, and I think what perhaps different people would look for to keep them in a company will vary on how what level they're coming in. Could you perhaps explain a bit more about that? Probably better than I can.
Yeah, I'll try. I mean, it's a very big topic, so I recommend if you want more information on that, if you put something like generational differences in the workplace, do Google. There's lots of articles about it that show the different ways and different things that people are motivated under various headings. I guess for me, one of the easiest things to look at is kind of length of service in a role. You know, in my grandparents' day, and they're probably pre-baby boomers, you know, it was very much you came out of school and you got a job or a career for life, and you stayed probably with that employer or at that workplace for your entire career. And that was safe and secure, and that's what you did. And, you know, roll forward, I mean, obviously each generation is slightly different, and that change has been gradual. You know, my generation, I'm a Gen Zer. I guess our retention in length of service in a role averages around 3 to 5 years. You know, we like a bit of commitment, but actually we get to a point where we're probably dedicated to a profession, but we're not necessarily dedicated to an employer as such. So we will look around for, you know, that similar career in different industries, just like I have. And then millennials, if we look at, you know, millennials and even Gen Z, people who are in education at the moment, you know, I always say to managers, you know, I think something that shocked managers was if you get sort of 1 to 2 years out of that person, you're actually doing quite well, because they have developed to the point that they feel like they want to move on. There's a lot more confidence in that generation of when they're ready to move and potentially do something different, or move into a different industry, or move into a different role in the same industry. So I think that shocks a lot of managers that, you know, they're going to put a lot of work in to develop somebody for 1 or 2 years. But actually for me, if you give that person 1 or 2 years of fantastic development for their future career, you've set them on this path. And if you light the fire under them of the industry, actually something that is also prevalent in that generation is they're not necessarily tied to a career for life. So they might join a company doing marketing, and they might fancy, I might learn a bit of software engineering, or, I mean, it's a very extreme example, but you know what I mean. You know, actually I have seen people do that. We've had people come off a factory floor and move into, you know, mechanical design, because they've actually been really interested in that side of things. And what Patrick was saying earlier, you know, those are hot skills. So if there are ways of doing your internal succession planning, for want of a better term, by engaging with what interests people, to fill those skills gaps, actually and working with those generational differences, it is frustrating. You know, I know that people being in a role for a year and then having to re-recruit must be frustrating, but that is where we are at the moment. And I think if you can keep those people engaged, then actually you might get slightly longer than that out of them. And actually, even if they did leave, it wouldn't be great if they left with brilliant things to say about their 1 or 2 years in the industry, or in that company within the industry. If they have a great time, that's almost your PR company to help with your recruitment. So for me, I guess that sort of demonstrates the differences in terms of how things have changed over time. You know, baby boomers tend to be attracted to, it's very harsh to say, but, you know, salary, the benefits side, because they're probably nearing retirement now. Whereas millennials are much more about the company values. You know, how does it feel? How does it feel to work there? How are you going to make me feel? How are you going to treat me? So it's much less tangible. And I think there's still a little bit of a temptation to advertise salary as the hook. And I think actually in recruitment, a lot of it is using people like you, Dorinda, to help market the values. You know, what does the company stand for? Why is it exciting? What can you expect when you get there? How are we going to support your learning and development for you? Because that's the other thing people want, is that continuous development the younger they are. So I think linking in and working with recruiters to help be that sort of marketing team almost, to talk about how we can support people, I think is so important.
Definitely. And I want to be like the biggest ambassador for the clients that I work with. And I want to work with clients that ultimately really care about their employees, because then it's easy to market that company. And I can speak genuinely. And I know, for example, like companies like Domino that do really, really look after their staff, it's easy to speak to the market about them, because I
think it's a great industry to work for. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Inkjet, and I only left because I wanted to pursue the freelance thing. Otherwise I would have stayed there, because actually what I loved is that that everybody loves the industry, and everybody is really passionate and enthusiastic about it. And that's what made me want to stay there and be passionate and enthusiastic about it with them, because there's some great stuff going on, and it is exciting. You know, it's sexy technology. It's exciting, you know, and I think getting people to understand that and be engaged in that is a real key.
And it's so many diverse. I mean, if you look even on this call here, we're all so different, aren't we? And that's what I also love. It's such a welcoming community, but it pulls together so many different types of people that can go from just being colleagues to being friends, and people that you want to stay in touch with for the whole of your life as well, and that want to help each other succeed. So final thoughts, we'll go through each of you again. Any final thoughts on getting people into the industry, working with universities, or it could be anything on how to keep your garden nice. Any final thoughts at all? We'll start with Patrick.
Oh, don't get me started on gardening, because I just found my roses weren't looking very great, so I had to apply some chicken manure, and it was sort of like, you know, it's now a little metaphor for this year, really, which is a little bit of dung, sort of like makes you bloom. That's one to be edited out, I think. I think the main thoughts really is just a case. I think it goes back to what both Pip and Christina sort of said, that certainly at the start of your career, you know, you're not just because you're young, you're not naive. You don't expect to go to a job for a big salary. I mean, it's lovely if it happens, but that's not your motivation, and it's not your expectation. Your expectation is am I going to find something that interests me? Because if you look at the education path, somebody goes to do a degree, so obviously somebody's enjoying learning. Somebody who then goes and does a postdoc after doing a PhD is somebody who enjoys learning, and they want to continue learning. And of course, we've said about Inkjet is it's got so many different disciplines and so many different challenges. You will continue to learn, you know. So as a graduate, or even as somebody further down into their career, you've got that Inkjet's strength is the fact there's lots of different skills and lots of different disciplines and lots of opportunities to continue learning.
And we've all got to keep learning, haven't we? I think the day you stop learning, you might as well just forget it, haven't you? Because you always keep learning.
It's that saying of Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club, which is all God does is watch us and kill us when we get boring, so we must never ever be boring.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Christina, any final thoughts from yourself? Perhaps what you could offer to the industry if someone was lucky enough to grab hold of you and tempt you over?
No, that would be great. So well, in terms of general thoughts, I think we've all reached to a similar conclusion to what Patrick has just said. It's in my case at least, it's not about salary. It's actually, we tend to think that the salaries in companies are higher than in academia, and sometimes again that may not match strictly, depending on kind of, again, you have to start somewhere, and it could be, I mean, you don't want to, or maybe starting as a manager could happen sometimes, but sometimes maybe some companies prefer to just test your skills. So I think, again, atmosphere and at least having that sort of drive that the company just looks into, you know, innovation. And again, I think we are curious people, as Patrick was saying, we like learning. And I think that has to be there, professional development, learning. And again, in my case, like the more people from international countries, the better. And, you know, all those bits. I had another thing about, especially with postdocs and things like that I mentioned before. I think there's also a bit of, like that companies should also trust that we have certain skills that are not strictly advertised in the CV. And it's not easy for us as academics to put certain things on a CV, but we may have those skills, and I think it's worth just, you know, testing them, like just, you know, having us in an interview or whatever, and just testing that we have them, or just like put us into context, and maybe they would, I think we can surprise some people out there with our skills. So
no, I think you're exactly right, and I often say to my clients, you know, a CV is a piece of paper, you know, and I've had many occasions where someone said, I'm not interviewing that person. I said, please do. You might not see everything on the CV, but I genuinely feel they can add value to their business because of X, Y, and Z. And this piece is not on their CV, but they can do that. And they have gone on and got the job, and they have gone on and been promoted since then. And it's not discounting people. And I think at the moment companies are opening up to having a 20-minute telephone call or a quick Zoom call or a Skype call or a Teams call. So they are a bit more open to that. And we are also, as a business at Profile, providing videos of candidates if companies want us to, and obviously the candidate's happy to as well, because then you can actually see what somebody looks like. And I think I exactly agree with you. You can't tell everything on a CV. It's the start of the process, but it's certainly not the person. I don't think a CV would ever do you justice from all the things that you've done, because you are far more than a CV. So Pip, final thoughts from yourself as well, last but not least.
That's fine. Yeah, I probably just echo what everybody else said, really. And I've got a few written down. So one is definitely consider those generational differences when you're recruiting for the talent, and employ strategies that will appeal. So as Christina said, and you just said, the digital recruitment, whether that's social media or whether that's embracing Zoom, as we've all been forced to during COVID. Actually, I've been using Zoom to recruit, and it's not the same as interviewing in person, but actually it's just as good as, and you get just as good a feel for somebody. But being able to see somebody is so valuable when you're recruiting. And if you can fit in that sort of 20-minute screen, actually that's really convenient, because you're not spending an hour out of your day for someone that you think, no, within 5 minutes or whatever. You can very quickly get a feel for, will this person fit in the culture? And I guess I would just say that employee engagement doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So one example of an engagement thing that you can do that's really practical is sort of implementing a thank you culture. So when I worked at Anglian Water, we used to have these postcards that you could write thank you to people on, and for what they'd done for you, and you could give them to anybody, and everybody gave them to anybody. And when you turned up to your desk and there was a card on your desk, it was so lovely, and the only cost of that was printing out some postcards. And it was such an easy thing, but it was lovely, and it's definitely something that I talk to my clients about now, because it goes a long way. Appreciation and gratitude for what people do when they're in your business. I think we often forget to say thank you to people. You can spend a lot on it if you want, but actually a lot of the time, the simplest strategies sometimes are the best. And my final point would be talk to people, listen to what they say would motivate and engage them. And you don't have to do all of it, but do some of it, because actually if your people are telling you, if you don't do it, the likelihood is they could leave if they're dissatisfied. But if you listen to them, what a difference that would make if you did you said, we did, isn't that amazing? And that then fosters a culture of, this business really listens to what we say in terms of how we think that the business should develop and go forward. And I just think that's really powerful. And again, not something that costs a lot of money. Asking somebody what they think and listening to it, that's free.
No, you're exactly right, and thank you. Sorry, Patrick, do go.
Yeah, I was just wanting to, there's something Pippa said about the thank you culture, and certainly I remember when I was looking for a position, I'm sure Christina the same, if you go for a position you don't get it, but the company still said thank you for your time, you actually have a much stronger impression of that company, because at least you know that you're considered. And you never know if you're going to work with that company down the road. Certainly if you're applying for, say, for a position in the printing company, there's a chance that you might end up with another company, and then you've already formed an opinion of the other company. Mm. So interviews work two ways. Sometimes you're interviewing a candidate for a role, but the candidate's interviewing that company for a role too. So.
I mean, the challenges right now are volume of applicant. I think in a normal jobs market, I totally agree. And Dorinda knows I was always a fan of giving her very detailed feedback.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I felt that even if someone was a no, if you could help them understand why they were a no, that would help them next time in their future interview. And like you said, it gives a good impression of whatever company that, you take it seriously and you do value the effort that they did put in, but actually you can help them. The issue at the moment is obviously volume of applicants in terms of the whole redundancy thing. Right. And, if you've got 300 people applying for a job, how feasible it is to reply to them all. And I think that is very much a now problem, which will be overcome. But I think I know from the other side of it, a lot of companies are struggling with keeping up with letting everybody know. And I know that candidates are finding that frustrating, and it's very difficult balance to get right. And I think if you work with recruiters, it makes it easier because you can have the conversations, give the information, and they can do some of the work for you. But if you're recruiting direct, it's at the moment it's a high workload to manage, and it's probably the most important time when feedback would be so important and that thank you would be so important. So I think there's work to do on how you get that right, without it taking such an inordinate amount of time. But yeah, no, I agree with you. In a normal jobs market, I absolutely think that's the right thing to do.
But you can still have, like, for example, automated replies to sort of say to a candidate, we've got a very high volume of applications. We may not reply, and that's just simply because we don't have the time. And, we apologise for that. It's just exceptional. So you could still cover that.
Yeah. And I think it's more, to me, I think it's, yes, you're exactly right, Pip, there is a high volume, and that's why it's good, because it's very much a time issue for companies, and that's why it's good to use people like myself. But I think it's once they've gone for an interview, then that shouldn't be high volume, massive high volume, and at that point, try wherever possible to give the candidate feedback, which, like I say, I know you've always done as well, because then they might not get that role, but they might be perfectly suitable for the next role. And if they've got good feedback and left with that's a great company and they looked after me, even though I didn't get the job, they'll get the next job if they're going to be right. And I think, going back to your thank you letter, if we can print cards, print is everywhere. We can keep the industry going as well, send thank you cards, keep other companies in business as well. And I think finally, communication is absolutely key, and it's all about relationships. It's all about people, and it's no good having the best technology in the world, but if you've not got the right talent in your business, then it's not going to be as successful as having the best people. So keep communication open, keep relationships open, and yes, thank you all very much for being on the panel.
There's one more, actually, and I think Pip sort of alluded to this, and that is, in the past you recruited to build a company, but now you recruit to build a network. And so, that you may have a person in your role for 2 years, 3 years. And in academia, we've been doing this, for a number of years, in terms of you have a postdoc, and then the postdoc moves on either into a faculty position or into a company position. And if you work well with them and you've worked well together, then you've got a good contact down the line. So it's worth, the attitude and the strategies that you recruit to build a network.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. Keep that network going as well. Well, thank you all so much for your time. And if there's any questions that come back, I will put people's details to direct you to the relevant people as well. Thanks again.